Mary Ellen, you want to start with some of those questions you were asking?
Yes. Could you tell us when the house was built?
Yes, I suppose I go back a little farther and tell you some of the family history. My great-great-grandfather, Samuel Charles, came up from North Carolina in 1810 to look over the situation. And then he went back and got his family and came up with his family in 1812. And he bought 640 acres, which included the south section of the Glen Park, as far as 22nd west and east to the Henley Road, and south to a large hedge south of Rookston Road, which is still there behind that row of lots. And he was called Righteous Sammy Charles. He and his wife, Bill Yelma, were very staunch Quakers. And then, as were his son and his wife Mary, who inherited the big house. Well, no, I think it was a very small cabin that Samuel Charles must have built. And then his son Nathan built the White House that's there now. And they were very devoted Quakers. They had, in addition to the White House that's there now, there were two wings on the east and the west.
This house?
No, I'm talking about the White House over in the Glen Park, behind the Rose Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And many Quakers came from a distance to attend the yearly business meeting, which you call yearly meeting. And they could seat 40 people for dinner. And then they had people sleeping on 2 floors of one of the wings. Women on one floor, men on the other. When they call it sleeping. And they were when Samuel Charles died, he divided the acreage among his 4 sons. And Nathan had the acreage slightly to the north of the what's now Main Street, and then quite far to the south. Then Nathan had several sons, and one was my grandfather, Matthew Charles. He attended Earlham boarding school, and then went to Antioch College, which was then run by the great educator Horace Mann. He must have had an excellent education because he taught Greek at Earlham, and when my parents came back from France, when he was an old man, he could talk French with them. He graduated at Antioch in 1860. My grandmother, Eliza Timberlake, was brought up on a farm near Wilmington, Ohio. And she went to Earlham boarding school in the 1860s. She used to tell me that at the time of the Civil War, there was a raid called Morgan's Raid when the Confederate general crossed the Ohio River and came up into Indiana. And I think they must have let the college out to have the students go home, because she said that on the train on the way to Wilmington, they were all worried for fear Morgan would surround the train. But that didn't happen. She got there safely. So then my grandparents must have got married in 1865, because the 3 little triplets that are buried in the Earlham Cemetery were born and died in 1866.
Mary Lane, go back to your great-grandfather's house for a moment. And
yes.
Is it documented that was a station on the Underground Railroad?
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, they found a sub-cellar where they think that it was that runaway slaves were hidden.
Uh-huh.
Now, there's a story, I understand, about your cousin or whoever helped in hiding the slaves, that he used to wear a big overcoat.
And yes, that's what this older cousin that I was speaking of, was more or less an ancestor, he would wear a big overcoat with food in the pockets, and he'd go out into the woods and leave the food usually on a stump or beside a tree, and then the food would disappear.
Do you think that was your great-grandfather?
I have no idea who it was, but it might have been my great-grandfather or one of his brothers. Then my father's two older brothers and he were born in this house. My father went to Earl. After he graduated, went to Hiatt and got an M.A. And then he taught at Germantown Friends School. And then he and my mother were married. She went to Bryn Mawr. I'm quite sure she went to Bryn Mawr, near Germantown. And they went to Oak Grove School in Maine, where he was principal, and she taught Latin. Then they went 2 years to Germany, where he studied German and also English literature at the time, Shakespeare. And my mother studied art history. Then when they returned, my father began to teach at Earl, became head of the language department, and was there for more than 40 years. I might say that just after the First World War, when there was great misery and starvation in Europe, Herbert Hoover undertook to get food to Europe, and he asked the American Friends Service Committee, which had just been formed, to undertake this. And my father, with his experience in Germany and his knowledge of German, was asked to undertake the work in southern Germany of child feeding. Because of the food situation, my mother and I couldn't go along. We went to France, and she studied at the Sorbonne, and then was head of a hospitality house at one of the huge American cemeteries in northern France. And I was put in boarding school 1 year at Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris, and the next year at Versailles. My father was not only concerned at that time about feeding the unfortunate German people, but at the time of Hitler persecution, he went around to people in Richmond and got money to bring a liberal college or university professor to Richmond to save him from the persecution. And he was very active in the formation of Quaker Hill, which became a refugee hostel for many European, particularly German and Austrian refugees from the persecution.
Would that have been in the late 30s or early 40s?
Well, I think he brought the professor here in the late 30s. And, well, it was the very early 40s. I think Quaker Hill was started about 39. And I worked there on the staff teaching English in the winter of 40.
Was Quaker Hill founded then specifically for that purpose? Or were there a number of reasons? Was it founded as a retreat center, and that was one of the things?
No, it was the home of the Woodards, who had been prominent Quakers in the time of my grandparents and friends of my grandparents. And the house went to rack and ruin. And their grandson, Isaac Woodard of Indianapolis, decided that it should be restored. And so he restored it, but I don't know whether he had an idea in mind of what it would serve as. But when the American Friends Service Committee wanted to have a refugee hostel in Richmond, then that proved to be an ideal place for it. And then later, of course, it became a retreat center.
Do you remember who the professor was that your father was able to bring?
No, I don't remember his name.
Was it Robert Silver?
No, he was not a professor. He had been a theater manager, and he came to Quaker Hill as a refugee, when it was a refugee hostel. taught art history for a while in Earlham, and then taught French for over 20 years in high school. And here are a few of the remains of what was a great big library. After my father died, I had people of the German department of Earlham and of Wilmington come and select the books that they thought could be useful. So these are just a few of his books which remain here. These are a few of my mother's art history books. These are, I said he had studied drama in the time of Shakespeare, and these are some of his books. My mother was very much interested in the Bloomsbury group of Virginia Woolf, and she has some of her books are there. Some of my French books are there, although most are in the next room. And these are my Italian books. Later then, when we outgrew this bookcase, we built huge, covered the walls in the next room. And you might also be interested in some of the furniture. This was my mother came from Kentucky, and this was my great-grandfather's desk, they lived on a large farm near Maysville, Kentucky, and this is supposed to have been made by a cabinet maker in the neighborhood.
Can you tell us when this house was built, right? And the function that's here, you said it was a dairy farm.
Yes.
Was first built.
Well, and then later, of course, it became, well, I might say, the section that belonged to my grandfather, but then the land had shrunk to 40 acres. And so then it chiefly corn and alfalfa, crops like that were raised on it in the latter years.
Do you know when the barn was taken down?
Yes, I do very well, because it was, let's see if I can tell you. It was around 1960 maybe. Some friends, some neighbors, Bob Herb's daughter wanted to keep her horse here, and but the barn was falling down, and my mother said it ought to be repaired, and I said, well, why repair it? We don't need a barn. And so we got a man to take it down for the lumber. Well, he took forever taking it down. And then we brought a little house that was down the road and put it in the place so that Judy Herbst would have a place for her horse. And for a while the horse was in a room with wallpaper.
Now, how did you carry the house down here?
Well, it's amazing to me the way they transport houses. I don't know whether it was a big truck, big flatbed truck that brought it. Sometimes, of course, they had logs and rolled them. And I was reading about, I think it's Salem, Massachusetts, I was reading about. They said 300 houses had been changed, their location had been changed to get them in a group. It just boggles my mind to think how they transport sometimes fairly large houses. Of course, this was a very small house.
Can you tell me why Richmond Community Schools named Charles after your mother?
Oh, well, as a matter of fact, I mentioned our friends and neighbors. The Herbst, Bob Herbst was president of the school board. It was about 1950, after my father's death. And he came to Mother and said they would like to name it for my father and mother. And she said no, she didn't want a name for her. But she was very much pleased they wanted a name for my father.
Did the Charles family own the land?
Yes, that was part of the land, the Charles family.
Was it donated to the Richmond?
Not completely, but it was sold at a low price.
Could you take us through the house?
Yes.
Before you do that, though, tell us about that quilt you were sitting on. Will you?
Oh, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. This was given me by my aunt, who was a Garwood, and she lived over on Garwood Road in the big house where the Sue and Bill Quigg live now. And we know that D.I. Grave was an itinerant weaver who spent several months in Wayne County around 1848. He was evidently a more skillful weaver than an American. So I was very much pleased to have my outfit to me.
Did he weave it for her as a gift, or did she purchase it from him? Do you know?
Well, she couldn't have purchased from him because she wasn't even born in 1848. I think it came down through the family. I suppose somebody at that time bought it. Then it came down to her, and then she decided that I was the one that should have it. But it is just a handsome cover.
Well, now I'll follow you into whatever room you like to
Well,
go.
we'll go into the study, as we call it. Now, so far as the family is concerned, this sofa is the first piece of furniture that my Charles grandparents bought. And these are what are left of my French books. I've given away a lot. And then those are other books of mine that I hope to find a good use for. It's hard to give away books, I find.
Could you talk about the fireplace that's behind you?
Well, this, apparently, there was a fireplace here. There's a chimney up above. And this was just walled up because there was a fireplace in the library. And then back to back with it, there's a fireplace in the north room. So that seemed to be enough. Mother-in-law. Are you?
I am now,
Old
yes.
desk of my mother-in-law. And then those are grandchildren and great-grandchildren and young cousins.
Is this the desk at which you write fiery letters to politicians? Okay.
Well, you might go through the kitchen. As my youngest granddaughter wants it. It seems they're stylish now. And then that wallpaper has fairy tale English, French, and German. Originally, there was a wall here. See, that was the front door. There was a little porch there, a very Victorian porch. There was an extension of the house, and this was a music room, my mother's piano, an old-fashioned square or rectangular piano stood here. And then the kitchen was behind it, and the dining room was over there. So when this wall was taken down, and because this made such a pleasant large room, this was made into the dining room, and the kitchen where the dining room had been.
So the kitchen was down by the three-cornered cupboard. And the buffet.
Here.
Okay.
It's a big country kitchen. And then up above, 2 bedrooms were added. So that it made a colonial facade, but it was even and right height. My parents had an architect from Indianapolis come and go over and get the proportions just right. So this is a...
While I'm here,
Yes.
where did the furniture come from? The three-cornered cupboard.
This is a family piece. As I said, my mother came from Kentucky, and her Kentucky relatives gave her a good many things. That is a sugar chest, and it came from Kentucky, so that the servants couldn't get in and steal the sugar. The corner cupboard was bought by my parents. I don't know much about it. That buffet was a family piece. Well, this aunt that gave me the cover and gave us this table. The chairs are not antique. They're just copies of antiques that were bought in Boston, or ordered from Boston. she had some scraps and had a woman to make it.
What can you tell us about this room and the...
Well, I wanted to show you the great-great-grandfather clock. And while you have your camera pointed that way, that's a Marcus Moak picture. He was an artist at the time that my father and his brothers were small, and the Sunday school wanted them to learn the book of Mark by heart. Said that Marcus Moak said he'd give a picture to anyone who did, and my father and his brother both did, so my cousin has another picture by Marcus Moak. And these chairs, there are a half dozen of them, belong to my Kentucky great-grandmother. They were her parlor chairs. This was my grandmother's sewing chair. And this is a log cabin quilt that my grandmother made.
Is there any significance to these beautiful rugs that they purchased here?
Well, it's just that my parents bought them, I suppose, at a time when they weren't too expensive.
You and Kathy in particular, but we're now filming the stairs with holes in the risers for circulation going upstairs. While traveling up, I'll say that this is October 26, 1988, and Mary Ellen Donat, who writes Richmond Remembers from the Richmond Lady Ida, purchasing this house. Are together with me, Lynn Clark, interviewing Mary Elaine Hiatt, who's lived here for many years.
Right. Well, I have a large ranch cabin, but it's small and other than our house are small. The ankles. Are you coming?
Yes?
This is a four-poster bed that came from Kentucky, from my mother's family.
Now, was that in your family for many years, do you think? Or?
Oh, yes, ever since I can remember.
Is it a rope bed?
It was originally, I suppose. And then that, I don't know about that little washstand, but that came from Earl. They used to have that kind of bed.
Were you born in this bed, Mary?
I suppose so. Yes, I'm pretty sure it was.
You don't remember it clearly.
No, I really have lost track of that.
But that is your mother's bed. That's the bed that everything
Yes.
ours made in this house. Is it a cherry or did you know that?
I think it's cherry. I'd have to look at Steve Archer's person. I'll be sure. Mother was very nervous here in the country. She was completely isolated. And I think, you see, you could fasten it there. And I think she felt safer with a child in that room and she and my father in this room. Then the house was closed down.
Now, was that a typical setup of rooms?
I have no idea.
It's so interesting.
But this was your bedroom then, Mary Elaine?
Yes.
Is this basically the furniture that was here as you were growing up?
Well, no, I got rid of some very handsome lyre-back chairs that I gave to a grandson. You might like to take a view of this. This is my father and my husband.
me that again.
It's a great-grandmother's bowl and pitcher and washstand.
Which great-grandmother?
I'm not sure.
Mary Lane, you say this was originally the side door, is that right?
I'm not sure. It went into a hall. But I do have the impression that they used the others, the front door more. On the other hand, there was a hitching post right there. So I don't know. Afraid I wasn't too much interested in the past.
Well, Kathy, why don't you just walk around with her and I'll follow. You'll have to speak loudly, though, I suspect.
Okay, well, when we were here before, would you like to talk about the wildflowers?
Oh, yes. All over there are wildflowers. There are bluebells, hortensia here. All over the yard. The first thing are aconite. They're not wild, but they're snowdrops, of course. And then lucilla all over the yard. And when that goes, a whole succession of 40 wildflowers go. And in the east part there's narcissus and daffodils that have been naturalized.
You outlasted this beech tree on this property. Or was that? No, that's an old oak, isn't it?
No, that was a beech.
Was it?
And it just gradually died the last 2 or 3 years.
I suppose you remember playing in this yard as a girl.
Oh, yes.
Where did you play mostly?
Well, all over. I climbed trees, and my little friends from town would come out, and we'd follow the leader, and they couldn't do the things I did. They weren't used to it. I love that.
That's true of many of your Earlham colleagues when we went down to the state park, you know.
Pardon me?
That was true of many of your Earlham colleagues when we went down to the state park. They couldn't keep up with you either, including me.
Now tell them the story about the tennis courts, how your mother was busy in the garden and you'd rather not.
Yeah, there was a tennis court over there for a number of years when I was in my teens. And my mother would say, do you want to play, will you help me in the garden? And I said, no, I want to play tennis. I said, when I'm old, I'll work in the garden.
Walk over by the kitchen.
Yes.
The hitching post?
Well, it was over there, but it's been moved over back here. The trees grown out around it. And my mother liked daylilies, and so she had a row of them here, and then she planted them all down in the south yard. And we go down there. Yes, just overgrown.
Oh, uh-huh.
Is it grass? It's painting right now. Now, Mary Lane told me that all of these quarry rock or whatever, that her father had placed them here and terraced off this.
Yes, he went down to, I think it was Elkhorn Falls. And then the big stones were from the East Main Street
unusual windows with the lattice on the top.
Yes.
Has that been that way for as long as you can remember?
Now those windows were replaced, right? The photographs showed us that there were two little windows there.
That's right.
And then
That's
they put in.
it.
You know what time period the picture windows were put in?
I have no idea. They've been like this ever since I can remember. Oh, yes, I will. Well, this is where my mother had her border. She had daylilies, clocks, peonies, especially down there at that south end. She had other things there. She had French flowers. And that bench is a Sedgwick bench, and it was manufactured in Richmond. It's rather a famous old company.
Now, have there been any takers for that old bench, or will that?
You mean the white bench? This,
Yes, the white
I may take it with me.
Oh, that would be good.
It depends. I have to find out how expensive things are to transport.
Notice that was another color.
Yes, it's the same one. Used to be white.
And you say there are 40 varieties of wildflowers here.
Yes. She wanted me to talk about the arrangement for the 4 acres that are here. I wanted to preserve the trees, not have it built up. And so finally I worked out an arrangement with Hayes Arboretum to what's called an easement. And it means that it can't be built on except for necessary buildings like a garage or tool house. And they will protect it.
And it is a virgin Hoosier forest, actually. Beech trees and maple trees. And I understand the beech trees were used for the timbers of this house.
I've never heard that.
They are, that you have beech timbers that are the supports for your house, and that's what they were used for.
Were the cisterns on the property, Mary Lane, from runoff from the
Well,
roof?
this one, the one right there, that was run off from the roof. And there's one over at the other corner of the garage that was.
And then where was the well?
Down there. You might like to take a picture of that because it's
When do you suppose this building was built?
Oh, it was built right after the Second World War. It was a little house. It was a little rental house.
Oh, was it? Uh-huh.
And they took the rental. Very good. That was where my little cage for my dog. Oh, there, okay.
This is, those are outside stairs, aren't they?
Well, I think they're the stairs, the cellar stairs, right?
But do they go to the outside?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. Now, what do you think this
This is a
mounded
cistern.
concrete
We
thought that was a well, but it's supposed to hold water.
Well, where did the water come in, David?
North African desert, and all the time he was around the world, he wanted to come back and retire to Richmond, and he kept the lot right by the golf course for his lot, and he came back and built a house and lived there till he died at the age of 99.
And that is the house, the Rose Garden house.
No, that's the Rose Garden house is the great-grandfather's house.
And that was...
This is a house on 28th Street, a very modern house.
Oh, I see.
And it's just a block north of the National Road. And
It's one of those little side
Yes.
streets that go on.
and he's the person for whom the Charles lectureship at Earlham is named. He studied Greek in the Richmond High School.
Were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was wondering what his relationship with you was again.
He was a first cousin of my
First
father.
cousin of your father's.
And the Rose Garden house, is there a name for
Well, it's the Charles homestead, I guess.
the Charles homestead? And that is where the Underground Railroad was?
Yes.
And was it your grandfather, Nathan, who wore the big overcoat with the food for
No,
the...
he would be my great-grandfather. I assume so, or one of his brothers. I don't know. It's just a family.
Was Nathan your great-grandfather?
Yes.
Now, is that home, I thought I heard it's being restored. Is it owned by the park?
Yes, and Dean Bosner was very much interested in restoring it.
Is there a chance we could go through the house and look, or is there...
Yes, you have to make arrangements because it's open. It's kept locked.
That's very nice. And so that was a stopover on the Underground Railroad. You were talking about Matthew was your grandfather,
That's right.
Nathan's son, and he went to Horace Mann's...
He went to Antioch College at the time that Horace Mann was president
Okay.
and graduated in 1860.
1860. And your grandmother's name was Eliza?
Yeah.
And she attended school at Earlham, and during the Civil War, she was going back by train to her home in Kentucky.
No, in Wilmington, Ohio.
Wilmington, Ohio, and that was when they were worried about Morgan's
The
Raider.
mortgage rate, yeah.
But did she meet your grandfather at Earlham?
I don't know. Because they were there 10 years apart.
Okay.
Or not that much quite, but quite a little apart. I don't know how they met.
And the triplets were their first children?
That's right, yeah.
And then your father was born a little bit later?
Yes.
And what was his name?
Arthur Matthew Charles.
And did he have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, he had 2 older brothers.
And they all grew up in this house? Was he born in this house then?
Yes.
Probably in the same bed that you
I have no idea. I don't think the Charleses kept very good records.
When you were talking about his work in Germany following World War I, Herbert Hoover asked the Friends to help distribute food.
Yes.
And was there a name for that program?
Well, it was the American Friends Service Committee,
Okay.
and it was, helping build up the devastation of the war as well as helping with the starvation.
So
Feeding the starving people, particularly in Germany, it was the children.
and you went with your mother to France while he was in Germany, and that's where you went to boarding school.
Yeah.
How old were you when you went?
12.
And how old were you when you returned?
Well, it was a little over a year.
And then during the Hitler persecution, your father raised money in Richmond?
Yeah.
Primarily from...
Well, he also wrote, because going through letters in the attic, I found that he had written to people in Philadelphia, Quakers in Philadelphia.
And Did he primarily raise the money from Quakers, or were there
I
other?
imagine so. I don't know. I just know he'd get in the car and drive around. I don't know very well.
But the liberal intellects that he helped come to intellectual,
College or university professor.
were they Jewish, or?
I'm not sure. Not necessarily, because liberal people were persecuted as well as Jews.
And when they came to Richmond, they stayed at a refugee hostel.
Not then. That was earlier in the 30s.
Okay.
That family, I don't know, that was probably who raised the money for the house for them to live
Oh,
in.
did he raise money for one family to come,
Yes.
or several?
No, just that one family. Then it was at the
Jones house.
the beginning of the Second World War that the Evans house became Quaker Hill, and that a number of refugees came.
Yeah, it's called.
You said Evans, but you had said Woodward earlier, or
Well,
Woodard.
the Isaac Woodard was the grandson of the Evans.
I see.
Okay, now this house was a dairy farm first, and then it became a farm where they grew corn and alfalfa, and it became 40 acres. And you say you have 4 now?
Yes.
That's interesting.
You think this started out as a 160-acre quarter section?
Well, that was my great-grandfather's Nathan, you see.
Uh-huh.
There would be a fourth of the 640.
I see.
Then his children, I don't know whether each of them got 40 acres or what, but that's what my grandfather had.
It's a typical pattern.
And Judy Herbst?
Herbst, H-E-R-P-S-T.
Oh, good. I have it. And about what year was that this little house was moved over here? That Judy wanted to
Let's see, it would be, maybe around 1960.
Oh, not that long ago. So that was after Robert Herbst had come to your mother and asked permission. Was he asking permission, or was he?
No, well, what he wanted is he was friends of the school board. He wanted the Charleses to donate the land. But you see, it's not only my family, but all our relatives who are descended from Matthew Charles. And so they decided that they wouldn't donate it, but they would give it at a very much reduced price.
And then it was after they gave it at the reduced price that he returned and said that the decision was to name it for your father.
Well, I think he came to her first. He came to her and said they wanted to build a school and name it for both of them.
Oh, I see.
And she said no, she didn't want it named for her.
Okay. But it was at the same time that he came and asked for the land that he said that the school name would be Charles.
Yes, that's right.
And that was around 1950.
That was, around 1950.
The Martha Smote painting, I thought that was so interesting. He was your father and your uncle's Sunday school teacher?
Well, they were children. They were about 8 or 9 years old. Well, the Sunday school teacher then asked Marcus Smote to give a picture.
Oh, okay, but Marcus Smote was not the Sunday school teacher.
I don't think so.
Oh.
He was a famous Richmond artist.
I thought maybe he was the Sunday school teacher, but he was a friend of the Sunday school teacher.
Yes.
What year would that be? If your father was 8 or 9 years old, could you tell me
It would be in the 1880s.
I think that's really interesting. So you have a Marcus Smote of Richmond. Oh, and I thought it was interesting when we were outside and you said your little friends from town would come. This was considered country.
Oh, it was in the country, yes. There was only that big white house over there diagonally opposite that was built.
Oh.
They were the Mormons, and they were good friends of my grandparents. Of course, there were only people around.
Did you say Marmon?
Mormon. Did you ever hear of a Mormon, Carter? They were
Well, now that you mention it, yes.
And they developed them.
Now, there's a Marmon house at Earlham. Is that any connection?
I suppose it is. I don't know.
Marman?
M-O-N.
M-O. That would be something something interesting to look into. And Mary Lane, what year were you born?
1907.
We won't ask your age, however.
I don't want 1907, but I don't want this article put in the paper anytime soon. I've had enough for now.
Right now. You being the outstanding woman. Okay, you talked about your father brought the quarry rock from Elkhorn Falls
Yes.
to terrace the yard. That's Elkhorn Falls, just south of Richmond, right?
Yes, that's right.
And your father brought it, not your grandfather?
No, my father did.
And the large steps were brought from the meeting house?
Yes.
Was that the meeting house that's now the museum?
No, it's the one in 15th of May, First Grand Street.
Oh, and they were what, just rebuilding steps and...
I suppose so. Well, they didn't want them anymore.
And could you tell me a little bit more about your arrangement with Hayes Arboretum? Is there a time limit on that, or is it...
No, I think it's in perpetuity.
Good. And you said it was an easement?
Yes.
And, so what does that mean, that they own it? Or...
No. Anybody that buys it owns it.
I see.
But is limited from selling it off for lots or building some kind of a commercial something on it or doing too much damage to the trees, I suppose.
It's treated like a national forest.
Oh.
Basically, that's the idea.
That's great. And you said that this is a protected virgin Hoosier forest. That's right, maple trees and beech and maple trees. That's I'm starting to bring